Hello and welcome to the Aviation Briefing with me, William Hallowell. In this podcast series, I speak with industry and media colleagues about the biggest stories and topics in the aviation industry. And today I'm joined by Sally Gethin, who is an aviation commentator and journalist, and we're going to be talking about the deepening crisis going on at Boeing. So, Sally, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So let's talk firstly about developments this week. Obviously, the National Transportation Safety Board in the US has released a report into the incident that's kind of plunged Boeing into a really difficult position at the moment with the flight, the Alaska Airlines flight that took off, and the panel that flew off midair, forcing it to land. What do we know about what the report says so far?
Well, basically, the report highlights the fact that the door was never viable. The plug door was never viable in the first place. And it sort of scrutinized the sign off between Spirit, the supplier, and Boeing. So there were some damaged rivets around that door that meant the plane, the fuselage was sent back to Spirit. And Spirit mended those rivets, but failed. They had to take the bolts for that door off to mend the rivets. And then we don't know who, why, and how those bolts were not put back into place. So really shockingly, I mean, really, it's incredibly shocking that that door was somehow just, it was like a house of cards. That door was sort of like never stable or robust at all in the first place. You know, this is a door that opens upwards. It's never supposed to be used, really. And so it was at risk of just coming away at any time. And it's unbelievable, actually, that the aircraft got to 16,000 feet before it came off. I mean, it could have happened at any time. It's an absolute miracle there were no fatalities. It's such a close call for Boeing. And before, I came onto this interview today, I was looking at my notes. I've been tracking Boeing's checkered history since the Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines crashes in 2018 and 2019. And do you know what? It's like Groundhog Day. We've been there before. There have been, congressional hearings and FAA scrutiny, and very strong words were said. The full due process was done, and yet here we are again. We're lucky as an industry we haven't seen fatalities off this plane, and the individuals concerned should also count themselves very lucky, the passengers on board. But it's such a close call, and you're right, it's deeply problematic for Boeing. It's really deeply problematic, and also it's like exhausting, right? So we were all here, Boeing was in this situation 4 years ago, exactly in the early part of 2020, with all the scrutiny that went on with the Boeing 737 MAX then. And now here we are 4 years up the line, and have lessons been learned? It doesn't look like it.
And it is extraordinary because, this isn't a one-off event. As you say, there is history with this particular aircraft. But in light of the event in January with the Alaska Airlines flight, both United and Alaska say that they looked at their other MAX 9 aircraft and found, missing parts in those as well, which it is, I don't think there's any other way to describe it than, an extraordinary situation for, a manufacturer that is, held in high regard. Their aircraft fly all around the world.
I think, I listened a bit yesterday to the live congressional hearing. There's a new FAA administrator in place, and he was Mike Whitaker, and he was brought before Congress, and he was given a grilling by a particular Congressman Van Drew, who said, how unacceptable the situation is with Boeing, and that every American should be able to enter an airport and have confidence that they are boarding a safe aircraft, and pointed to the outsourcing as being an issue at Boeing, and that being part of a wider globalization issue. I think it really also goes to the heart of American industry, because aviation has always been an American-led industry for decades. It's changed now in the last 10 years with China, for example, coming more on stream. There are more regions that are entering the game of aviation, but America prides itself on its relationship with aviation and Boeing in particular. And so for this to happen kind of shakes the confidence of industry. And that's why the federal government is so heavily invested now in what happens. And, the next steps will be literally a lot of tangible steps will take place now. So as the FAA is saying now, we'll put more boots on the ground at Boeing, because if that's what it takes, that's what it takes, because there is a huge quality control issue going on at Boeing, and it's very worrying if the upper management at Boeing is unable to actually control, the quality control processes there, literally on the manufacturing and assembly floor. So it means there has to be literally more eyeballs and more engineers going in there. I mean, even airlines are saying they want to do that now. I think Emirates is sending its own engineers to ensure safety and quality control of their airplanes being manufactured at Boeing. I mean, that's pretty unprecedented that, the CEOs of major airlines are coming forward and saying, well, actually, we don't have confidence in Boeing, and to make sure we're going to send our people there to actually, have a hands-on role on the assembly floor. So, yeah, it's a worrying point for Boeing.
Yes, the comments made by the Emirates president is certainly something I want to move on to, and his concerns over the decline in standards in his view. But talking about Boeing specifically at the moment, I mean, in light of this incident and the fallout of it, I mean, where does Boeing stand in terms of the reputational and financial impact as well?
Yeah, it's bad, isn't it? I mean, I didn't think it would get any worse after what happened with the MAX, with those catastrophic incidents. And there was a big literal post-mortem after that, going into the causes of those incidents. And again, very shockingly, it turned out the plane itself, its very aerodynamic structure was, in my opinion, flawed, because that's what led to the MCAS systems having to be installed in that incident. So, literally Boeing's reputation was on the floor then. And now it really has made huge efforts. And I actually personally have known Stan Deal, for example, who heads up their airplanes division, because he and I were industry colleagues a long time ago when Boeing had an in-flight Wi-Fi internet division. And so I got to know Stan a bit through being a journalist at the time then. And he's a great guy and he's got a lot of experience. But even so, there's something problematic going on at the company. I think when its customers start speaking out, that's when you've got to get worried, because that will damage the brand. And I think people have got used to boarding the MAX aircraft now in all its different iterations. So it's this was a MAX 9 particular aircraft. The next one will be MAX 10. But I think people, their confidence had come back a bit, and so just when it looked like Boeing was out of the woods and getting back into greater acceptance generally in travel and aviation, we have this massive setback, and it's not a quick fix problem. I think that's the thing with the MAX, the earlier MAX that crashed. It was MCAS system which was flawed, and it was quite that was quite helpful in the sense that everything could be pinpointed on that. Let's fix MCAS. But this is kind of pervasive issue, which is to do with quality control, engineering and management, and it's not one thing. And if it wasn't this plug door and the bolts, there were other issues that have been going awry at Boeing. The anti-icing system on board the aircraft has found to be have problems. And I think Boeing also issued a directive to customers to look out for missing bolts in the rudder system. I think that was around Christmas time or something. So it's just like in the latest series of troubling concerns on the factory floor at Boeing.
And in terms of, I mean, the liability, where that stands, everyone in the industry is asking that question. How could this happen? It's almost, should we be asking ourselves if this is a rhetorical question? How could this have actually happened? Again, like you say, we have had a history with this specific aircraft, and clearly there are ongoing issues at Boeing. But in terms of, responsibility, are we looking at, a single person, or is it going to be the whole, company that has to take responsibility for, what I think airlines are saying is, a massive failure, and certainly a lapse in safety standards?
Yeah, I'd agree, definitely. Massive lapse in safety standards. I mean, the consequences of those earlier crashes led to long-term litigation, and uh, I won't go into that now. Some people, might say that wasn't a satisfactory outcome. Um, I think, we have to wait for, there still has to be a completion of the full investigation. So we're just at this sort of interim point now where certain issues have been disclosed by the NTSB, but there is still more to run with the investigation and completion of that, and further questions around what really happened. I think that the NTSB is concerned that there doesn't seem to be a paper trail or anything to evidence who could be responsible. Now, I'm not an aircraft engineer, so I don't know what it's like when the sign off, how that complex chain of command works between supplier and airframer. But that will now have to be heavily scrutinized to find out. I think also what's concerning, and this has come up again, and I thought this had already been addressed, but clearly not, is this concern about potential collusion. Now, collusion suggests it's deliberate, and we don't know if it's more by chance than deliberate. But when you have FAA inspectors delegating some of the inspection work of Boeing to Boeing's own personnel, that undermines the checks and balances that should be in place to ensure robust safety oversight of aircraft. I think that's another issue. And also, we're talking about people who are highly skilled in their jobs at that stage, aerospace engineers and maintenance engineers who are at the top of their game, so to speak. And some of these kind of move around the industry. So you might have former Boeing employees, working perhaps with the regulator. It's like having that independent oversight it really has to be implemented properly and thoroughly to avoid any sort of casualness creeping into the relationship between FAA and Boeing, because often we're talking about people who might already have a collegial relationship, earlier on in their career with, say, Boeing, before they may have, gone further with their career and joined the regulator or another industry body that might be involved. It is very tricky, and listen, everybody wants the same thing. We all want safe airplanes. Boeing definitely wants the same thing, but it does seem a little bit stranded at this point in time.
So let's look more so now at, what this means for the airline industry. As I say, I believe the, United Airlines and Alaska Airlines, two of the biggest customers of this particular, MAX 9, they've found in a number of their, versions of this aircraft that there are missing parts. And as you name dropped the Emirates airline, Sir Tim Clark, the president, has, I've got the quote here, he said he's seen a progressive decline, which is quite an extraordinary thing to say, in terms of standards at Boeing. I mean, how will this impact, the wider industry in terms of, things like aircraft orders that airlines are waiting on?
Yeah, there is a shortfall anyway in the industry. There are waiting lists for the most popular airplanes, and so it's a strange dichotomy, really, that there is a need for more planes. There's such a thirst and appetite for air travel, amongst the traveling public, and airlines are desperate to get their hands on these planes, but at the same time, due process has to take place in regards to a particular plane type. And so the particular customers of the MAX 9, as you mentioned, will be at a disadvantage, and they're not used to that. I mean, you and I both know, I'm sure, William, you've been to, conferences and heard Sir Tim Clark speak, and I have. And these people have laser focus when it comes to, the cutthroat business of the airline industry. It's so competitive, and they are so exasperated. Like, they feel like, well, we have to go in and lecture our supplier, who we're paying shed loads of money for these planes, how to do their job, and it leaves the industry with a shortfall of those airplanes, which means in turn that there's more concentration, so there's, when you have lower capacity, in other words, lower capacity of the product, which is the airplane, it means that airlines, the prices are going to go up, and airlines are going to be competing for more aircraft, and that in turn could also drive airfares up as well. So there's lots of ramifications for the airline industry out of this, and everybody will be closely watching. I mean, airlines have, according to the airline, they'll have different policies. They might have a mixed fleet, i.e. maybe Airbus and Boeing, and some might go for an all Boeing fleet. And obviously US airlines tend to go with Boeing a lot, not always, like JetBlue, has a single aisle Airbus A320 fleet, for example, but they do like to have a mix. Ryanair swears by the Boeing 737 MAX, although it doesn't have this particular MAX 9 in its fleet. It's really helpful. The 737 MAXes are really helpful to low-cost carriers where costs have to be kept, really, tight and at a minimum in order to ensure any sort of profit margins for those airlines. So yeah, there's a lot of scrutiny on Boeing. There's a lot, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of demand for their airplanes.
And that's it, isn't it? Because, airlines are suffering as well. There have been a number of reports that I've seen that, particularly in the US, as you say, a lot of them favor Boeing. A lot of them are potentially, going to cancel their orders as a result. They're nervous, they're concerned. They seem to have lacking confidence now in Boeing. But it doesn't seem that everyone, you say Ryanair, they've already come out and said, look, if there are any US airlines that are, going to cancel their orders, we'd be happy to take them up. So, I mean, what do you make of that? That clearly there are some, players out there that, will swear by Boeing, even in light of, these kind of recent weeks.
Yes, that doesn't surprise me. I saw that, also about Ryanair, going out and trying to get extra airplanes. I think, I mean, I think it's like any relationship. The more you invest in it, the more you can be compromised by it in some ways. So airlines, there are large order times, before, so they'll place the order for an aircraft, and then, they may have to wait years in some cases to actually get that airplane. And the longer that goes on, the more invested they are in that particular airplane type, the more their hands are tied. It's very hard for an airline to suddenly, depending on how far along it is in placing that order, but to actually just drop it all together. And yeah, we saw that when the MAX was first grounded. I think there were around 500 of those MAXes at the time. We're going back several years that were grounded, and Ryanair couldn't wait, to get its hands on the first MAXes that were out of the box when it had been re-engineered and certified. I guess, from the outside, it's kind of uplifting in a way to see that confidence that certain airlines have still in Boeing, like Ryanair has. It suggests that the problems can be fixed, that although it's not a quick fix, and the culture needs to change at Boeing, and the quality control issues need to be better implemented in Boeing. But it does suggest that it's maybe a temporary problem, and one that can be sorted out, and that the MAX still has a long, optimistic future. But don't forget, actually, there's other problems at Boeing, like the 777X has been so slow as well. The success story is more with the 787 wide body, but there's so much riding on the 737 MAX, and also there's turning out to be some issues with the other iteration of not the MAX, but the 737-900 as well. There are some quality control issues emerging around that as well. So that suggests it really is a corporate problem. You know, it suggests that the MAX, the type of airplane it is no longer the problem that it was several years ago after those crashes, that actually it's something beyond the MAX, and that maybe with the right oversight and the right boots on the ground, that it can be dealt with. And, you know, this could be just a hiatus, and that Boeing can get beyond this with support from some of its airline customers.
So to round things off, on that basis, then, I mean, I was going to, kind of lead into this question, but I mean, you partially answered it. Where does Boeing go from here? How do they get, these airlines? How do they say to them, look, we are working hard. We are, there hasn't been a safety lapse, or quality control, as you say as well. I mean, where do they go from here? I mean, do they have to do more than that? I mean, it seems like it's such a short incident. This is only since the new year this has happened, and obviously there has been history, but obviously we're here now. Where do they go from here?
So some people have pointed the finger of blame at the CEO, Dave Calhoun. They regard him as a bean counter, rather than an aviation guy, not somebody who hasn't been a pilot or an engineer in the way that a company like Boeing needs it. And does that suggest there could be a root and branch change there? Leadership has to come from the top, and it's been said that he hasn't spent enough time on the factory floor, literally. And then there have been changes logistically with closing down certain of their facilities and relocating engineers, and then they lost a lot of capable personnel in those processes, because the US is such a vast continent, and it can make a big difference to your retention of the core skills. Look, I'm not in charge of a massive company like Boeing, but remember when Dennis Muilenburg was in charge of Boeing at the time of those crashes, and eventually he went, basically. And I think there does need to be more scrutiny about who is leading Boeing and how they're doing it, and perhaps introduce some difficult decisions there about who is actually leading the company, and maybe discovering who's responsible for what at what time. I think it's helpful that the FAA is going to put boots on the ground, as they said, and there's a new administrator at the FAA. That could work both ways, in the sense that that new administrator might not have the long-standing relationship in the way somebody who's been the administrator for longer would have. I think it's going to be a slog. I think it's going to be the long, hard, tough sort of work that won't be completed overnight. I think it's all fine and good for the CEO to be eating a big piece of humble pie at the moment, but words are no longer good in this situation. It has to be results driven. And like I said earlier, we've been here before in terms of Congress investigating and making very similar statements about what was needed to change at Boeing. So we don't want to be here again in a few years' time with similar problems all over again. This really has to be dealt with, and might make for some uncomfortable meetings at Boeing and uncomfortable decisions. But if that's what has to be done, then so be it.
Well, look, Sally Gethin, thank you very much for joining me today on the Aviation Briefing. It's been great to have you, and it will be really interesting to see how this develops and how obviously Boeing, do respond to this in the coming weeks.
Thanks.
Thank you to all of you who listened to this episode. This has been the Aviation Briefing with William Hallowell.